interpretation, and he could clearly see that I was on the forestall rather than hasten side, you know. But he said we're at the point where we are threatened by the mark of the beast, and that's whatever that might seem to us, take it seriously and avoid it. And I thought, you know, it's a different way of saying things, but it's not that different from what many people who are not religious or whose opinions are not formed by the Bible still say nonetheless. And I took it to heart because he was clearly a good man who loved his job and who cared. We probably had vast ideological differences, and I know we did, but I love it when different points of view converge on the same value. And in his case, it was less liberty than it was disrupting our natural connection to God. And that's what he believes is happening wholesale and is accelerating.
Tell me about this talk about scientists pinpointing the date of Noah's flood, and why is that important?
I got so lucky. I first learned about this when I was on that Siberian trip where I told you that everything went wrong but went better than if everything had gone right.
Yeah.
I had gone to Siberia to go to Tunguska, which was 100 years ago. An asteroid hit Tunguska. At least they think it was an asteroid.
Well, in the atmosphere, it blew up.
Yeah, and there are various interpretations of how that all came down, and we're all going to fly to this spot. There's going to be a scientific conference, and we're all going to fly up there and camp out. And I thought it would be kind of neat, and atmospheric. I always like to set my chapters in my books physically, at a place rather than simply, organizing the information. But when I got there, I learned that a group of bureaucrats had commandeered our seats on the airplane and decided to get themselves a little junket at the state expense and go, toast the asteroid with a lot of vodka that they could put on an expense account. But as I was wandering around, angry and having gone quite a ways from Los Angeles to Siberia, I met an American scientist who'd been studying this, and he and his team, they're called the Holocene Impact Working Group, not exactly the catchiest title, had decided to see if they could pinpoint the Noah's flood. And what they did was that he's at Sandia National Laboratories in New Mexico, which is also where my little plasma physics company, we work over there. And so I got to talking to him about that. And what he had done is he had gone around and collected myths from 150 different cultures around the world, fed them into a supercomputer, and found that about a third to a half of them included a story about a great flood at just almost exactly the same point in the chronology of their stories. I mean, the dates are unreliable because some didn't specify and they had different dating systems, but sort of, a quarter of the way in, there was this great flood, and the stories, of course, in the Bible and in Greek mythology and, in South Pacific, and he said, this is too much of a coincidence. This is not just myth or made-up things. There's, some flood happened. So he deduced that a comet or an asteroid, you can never really tell, had hit somewhere in the Indian Ocean and had kicked up enough ruckus with...
Interesting.
Yeah. And he figured it out that he dated it back to 2807 BC. But he needed the smoking gun. He needed the proof that such a thing had hit. So what he did was he called his colleague, Dallas Abbott, and said she worked with NASA research satellites, and he said, please scan the bottom of the Indian Ocean and find me the crater what must have been made. And so she and her team set about, and they found this crater at the bottom of the Indian Ocean, and they also found the ejecta. Basically, you smash a rock into a mud puddle, and the mud spurts out, and makes a pattern. And there were these chevrons. The pattern was chevrons or hills of sand and patterns of sand on Madagascar that matched up exactly with that crater in the Indian Ocean. So they had the proof of the comet had hit, and he believes it's a comet, not an asteroid. The evidence that something had happened in that precise spot, both from the satellite photographs and then studying the patterns of ejecta in Madagascar, and they were able to date the fractured crystals in the sand through carbon-14 and other dating back to 2807 BC. And so he's got himself what he believes is a pretty firm working date for Noah's flood, thereby verifying what many people, I suppose, had simply considered, yet another Bible myth.
It's just interesting how the events are probably all real. It's the interpretation, the stories, the myths behind them that are so ever-changing.
Yeah, and it's kind of beautiful because, there's something of that magnitude is open to many different interpretations because there'll be so many personal experiences that came from that.
Lawrence, we're going to take phone calls with you next hour right here on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, this hour we'll take your phone calls with Lawrence Joseph right here on Coast to Coast AM. I don't want to keep people helpless with the possibility of an apocalypse in 2012. What do you recommend, Lawrence? What do they do?
Well, I believe that everyone should sit down and form what I call a family emergency plan. And that's just, okay, if something happens, such as the power grid gets shorted out or if some other major cataclysm occurs, what do? You have to decide who's included, who is your family, extended family, and maybe friends as well, and then assign responsibilities. Someone's got to drive. You've got to have a place where you all rendezvous. What do you do if you can't communicate, as would be likely? Someone's in charge of medicines. Someone's in charge, or a couple of people are in charge of water. Water is the toughest one because it's heavy and it's bulky. You have to be creative in looking for sources of water. I mean, let's say you have a swimming pool. Well, you can't drink the water in a swimming pool, but perhaps you can purify it such that it is acceptable. Just get it all together, make it a group project. I wouldn't say it's fun, but it's absorbing and engaging. And when to do it as soon as possible, but my personal preference, and some people will hearken to this, others won't, is Thanksgiving Day. When the families gather together and you're thankful for, we have great lives. We have so much to treasure and to conserve. And yet Thanksgiving these days is often just sort of about the turkey and not much else, not much sentiment. I think it's the perfect time to bring people together and say, look, there's a possibility, just a possibility, that we may be challenged and we may be threatened with the loss of the daily life that we hold so dear. So, what do we do to help ourselves through? I believe in the old saying, God helps those who help themselves. And is it a perfect response to whatever catastrophe might hit us? No, nothing is. But if we do our best and we know we've done our best and we haven't just taken things passively or relied on the government to bail us out, then I just think our odds of making it through really do increase quite a bit. And also our feelings about ourselves, that we stood up, we did something, we prepared. That's very important to me. I tell people don't head for the hills unless you got someplace to go in the hills and you know what to do when you get there. Those folks who have cabins in the mountains and near a lake, that's great, but most of us don't. Most of us don't really have the means of acquiring that, or it would be quite a burden to do so. Take refuge in your own life. Don't take refuge in some escapist fantasy. And make that family emergency plan. I really believe that. That's a good first step. And then that will lead to other discoveries and alliances in the community. I live on a cul-de-sac, and You know,